up episode 416 of Monster Kid Radio with the song Spirotonic. It comes from the band The Spiritones from their album Next Up, The Moon. You can find that over at the spiritones.bandcamp.com. They're a really cool surf band based out of Ulverston in the UK, and they gave us permission to play this song on this episode of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. I'm your writer, host, producer, Derek M. Cook, and I am glad you're here because I've got another new voice to add to the mix here. I feel like lately I've been collecting new voices to put on the show, different people to put on the podcast, people you've never heard from before, but maybe people you've heard of. This week, we have Mike Bogue. Mike Bogue is a film historian, an author, a man who knows his kaiju and knows his atomic monsters. So we're going to talk with him a little bit about atomic monsters, what makes an atomic monster, and he and I are going to do a top 3 list. It's been a little while since we've done a top 3 list. Well, he's going to tell me what his top 3 big bug monster movies are, and I'm going to share with him what mine are. And there are going to be some honorable mentions in the mix as well. And of course, because it's the first time he's been on the show, especially since it's the first time he's been on the show, we have to play a round of the Classic 5, just to kind of introduce Monster Kid Mike Bogue to the Monster Kid Radio audience. Also on the show this week, 2 of our favorite segments, Professor Frenzy's Bedtime Stories and Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. That's all happening in this episode, and of course the trailers and the promos and the ad for my new book. That's all happening right after this.
What does it look like?
I can't describe it. The hideous part of it is it's making the children obey its every command. The children are completely in its power.
And we're in the power of the children.
Space children, spreading a network of terror through a top-secret missile base in a nation's desperate hour of decision. Space children, the dangerous pawns of a power so strange that no sentries can stop them.
Why did you let those children inside here?
Not too warm, and what children?
Hey, this wrong here. Stop it!
No rocket can rise anywhere in the world.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
No army can destroy them.
Get those kids out of there!
Welcome to Planet 8. Every 2 weeks, the crew at Planet 8 Podcast explores the many worlds of science fiction, fantasy, superheroes, monsters, and more.
We cover the latest movies and TV shows, as well as old favorites, too.
Yeah, like Planet of the Apes.
It's a madhouse! A madhouse!
Hey guys, don't forget Star Trek.
Fascinating.
Or classic monsters like King Kong, Creature from the Black Lagoon, or Godzilla.
If it's nerdy or geeky, we'll probably be talking about it.
So why don't you tune in and check us out?
You can find us on iTunes or other fine podcast providers.
Come join the conversation at our website, planet8podcast.blogspot.com.
You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook.
This is Planet 8 Podcast. Signing off. End transmission.
Warning! Godzilla vs. the Thing. A shattering motion picture not for the weak of heart. Here in all its astounding realism is a soul-shocking experience. How much terror can you stand? What was this thing of unbelievable and unequaled terror that challenged Godzilla to a battle of unhuman strength versus supernatural evil? Godzilla versus the Thing. See the war of the giants. See the birth of the world's most terrifying monster. See armies of the world destroyed by the Thing. The producers of Godzilla vs. the Thing issue warning to those who cannot take its full horror. To you with guts, you must see Godzilla vs. the Thing from the beginning in color scope from American International.
Creature with the Atom Brain. A motion picture shot full of thrills based on scientific facts described in leading national magazines. You'll be hypnotized. You'll be terrorized. You'll be paralyzed. See a dead man come from beyond the grave. See Columbia Pictures' startling Creature with the Atom Brain.
Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy, show. Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy, show.
Welcome to Professor Frenzy's Bedtime Stories, created especially for Monster Kid Radio. My name is Gerry Green. In this segment, I'm going to tell you some stories contained in the EC horror comics. Today's story is The Thing in the Swamp from The Haunt of Fear number 15, the May-June issue from 1950. It was written by Bill Gaines and Al Feldstein, and the art was by Al Feldstein. So sit back, relax, and prepare for another chilling tale. Once upon a time, in the dark and foreboding Okefenokee Swamp, there were two men in a boat crossing the murky waters. The pair had heard that no one that entered this portion of the swamp had ever been heard of again. They wanted to prove the rumor false. On the shore, an old man in tattered clothes shouted and waved his arms to try to get their attention. They made their way over to him. The old-timer warned them not to go any further because there was great danger. The two scoffed at him, but the man invited them into his hut to explain. He told them about a time several years ago, Professor Carl Ward, his daughter Marie, and Robert Colby, her fiancé, set up a laboratory in the swamp. Professor Ward believed he could create life from raw chemical and electrical currents. They tried different compounds, different voltages, different processes. However, time after time, their experiments failed. Months and months went by. They tried infusing the mixture with radium, uranium, ultraviolet light, sound waves, but time after time, their work ended in disappointment. Finally, Professor Ward became angry and threw the concoction out the window into the swamp water. Out in the murky depths, the mixture found the compounds it needed to come to life. It pulled in and devoured birds, fish, and even alligators. Back in the lab, Robert Colby had had enough. He wanted to leave the swamp and take his fiancée with him. Professor Ward argued with him, but to no avail. Marie decided to stay with her father and continue their work, rather than leave with her husband-to-be. Furious at the betrayal, Colby left the lab and made his way across the dock. He looked back to see the building being devoured by the living swamp. Ward and Marie tried to escape but were swallowed by the advancing muck. The old man finished telling his story. The two guests laughed off his warning as an old wives' tale and set back to their boat. The old man shouted after them and said he knew the story to be true because he was Robert Colby. The two laughed and rowed themselves across the swamp. But something emerged in front of their boat. They cried out in panic. It is the thing in the swamp. Well, I hope you enjoyed that gooey tale. As much as I like haunted castles and smartly dressed vampiric villains, there's something especially creepy about a deep, dark swamp. The monster here isn't visually interesting. How can a pile of swamp muck be shown as a compelling creature in a comic? However, the effective part of the tale is the frustration of the old-timer at being ignored, and the twist where he is the one that survived the creature's attack. I wouldn't say that this reveal is a big shock to a modern reader, but with my Monster Kid hat on, it works just fine. The art is particularly well done, with the characters' faces. The old-timer and Professor Ward are particularly good. Their expressions are very clear, with frustration and anger conveyed perfectly. One panel shows just the head of the old-timer on a white background, and he looks crazy, but it turns out he's just frustrated that his warnings are ignored. The art works both ways. If you're interested in a copy of The Haunt of Fear, the book can be purchased on Amazon, and you can find a link to buy it on the MKR website. I hope you enjoyed the story. My name is Gerry Green, and you can find me on my podcast, The Professor Frenzy Show, where we talk about new indie comics, and Bat Books for Beginners, where we talk about historical Batman and Bat Family comics. You can also catch me on Twitter at Professor Frenzy. Search for Professor Frenzy on YouTube, where you can find The Professor Frenzy Show and some exciting projects we have coming up. Stay tuned, and thanks for listening.
Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy show. Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy.
The Human Vapor. The strangest science fiction story ever told about man's deadliest enemy, the human vapor. Never before a power so dangerous. Never before an enemy so indestructible. Nothing on earth could stop him. The human vapor, half beast, half man.
Dr. Sano had said I'd be a Superman. Instead, he had created the human vapor. Now I should be grateful to our doctor, shouldn't I? He did not do as he intended. Yet he did give me supreme power now. I can have anything I choose. Destroy anyone I care to.
No prison bars could keep him in. No door could keep him out. The human vapor slips through every crack, through every opening, to terrify, to destroy, to kill. See the human vapor transform before your eyes from human form to vapor nightmare. The human vapor brings you a haunting legacy of fear, causing panic and riot and devastation. See this weird story of a superhuman power that menaces the world. Who can kill like an inhuman monster, but who loves like a man? Here for the first time, the most dangerous experiment in terror. See the disintegration of a human being into the deadliest vapor killer. Born of woman, but recreated by an evil science into an ectoplasmic horror to stagger your imagination. The human vapor will come to life and bring you the most terrifying experience in scientific history. The human vapor. Is he man or astroman? The human vapor in living color on the giant screen. The human vapor.
Vampires, werewolves, zombies.
Yes, these things are real, but fortunately for those of us who can afford him, so is Mark Temple.
And he's good. Real good. He's a former FBI agent turned freelancer with the knowledge and skills to eliminate your monster problems. And his rates are negotiable.
Monster Hunter for Hire, the first volume of the Supernatural Solutions, the Mark Temple Case Files, is now available in both ebook and paperback. Go to tinyurl.com/monsterhuntertemple to buy your copy of Derek M. Cook's latest book.
Read about Mark Temple, the experienced professional now available to rid you of your supernatural, ghoulish, and monstrous pests.
That's tinyurl.com/monsterhuntertemple.
And don't worry, Mark Temple is discreet.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the living dead. The dead who live on living flesh. The dead whose haunted souls hunt the living. The living whose bodies are the only food for these ungodly creatures. Night of the living dead. More shattering than your strangest nightmare.
This is Count Vlad. but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Monster Kid Radio listeners, I love getting new voices in the mix here on the show, and I'm excited to invite Mike Bogue to Monster Kid Radio this week. Mike, how's it going?
It's going very well, very well. And I'm excited about this show.
Mike, I first became aware of who you are and what you do through your writing in G-Fan magazine, and then over the years, I started looking you up online, seeing if there's anything else you'd done, and I found you all over. Lots of Scary Monsters magazine articles, a couple of books, the Atomic Drive-In book I love.
Well, thank you.
Are these some of the highlights that listeners should look up? Or what's your most recent book?
Well, the most recent book is Apocalypse Then, American and Japanese Atomic Cinema, which you had mentioned. And you're right. I also, Scary Monsters, I have a column, I've had it for 7 years, called Kaiju Corner. I guess it's obvious what I talk about there, but Japanese giant monsters, but also non-kaiju films like Human Vapor, The H-Man, etc.
So the good stuff.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
I mentioned this on Facebook, and I've told you privately, and I want to say it here on the show, too, that in the most recent issue of Scary Monsters, as of this recording, you contributed an article about your memories of seeing Night of the Living Dead in the theater, and not to bring it down, because I know it's kind of a depressive kind of moment, but it was a very moving piece. So listeners, if you haven't read it, first of all, why not? Why are you not reading Scary Monsters magazine? But really, if you haven't read Mike's article in there about Night of the Living Dead, it's pretty moving. And I know I've told you privately, I want to tell you on the show, it really kind of struck a chord with me. It was really well done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was heartbreaking, actually, even thinking back then. And I was actually shocked. This was 1981. Of course, that's showing my age. You can tell how old I was. But it was the last thing I expected. My friend and me, it would just felt great. We're going to, pre-video days or just beginning of video, we were going to see Night of the Living Dead for the very first time, and all excited. And then what I recount in the article happened, and man, that was just, I just felt awful. But I appreciate that you appreciate the article. It's a little counter to what usually you think of as a monster memory in Scary Monsters. It's not a positive, upbeat one, which usually, is what Scary Monsters goes for. But it was an experience I had, and, I think it did reveal an aspect of America, not just in Arkansas where I live, but unfortunately in the country. But I hope we've come a long way since. I think we have come a long way since then, but I feel like we have still a long way to go.
I hope so. And listeners, to be clear, Mike's not saying that he didn't enjoy the film. It's the film experience that he writes about. So yeah, put down the pitchforks and everything. I'm sure he loves Night of the Living Dead. It's just, but it is, I think, an important thing to read. And like you said, it's a part of what America was, and in some places still is. So
yeah,
but not to bring things down. I mean, let's talk about something positive, like Atomic Monsters.
Okay.
What would you define as an atomic monster? I mean, you've written about them a lot, so how would you describe them to people?
It's a monster that is either created by atomic bombs, fallout, experiments, that kind of thing. And it almost always is going to stem from the 1950s. Not necessarily always, but that's really when it started. So to me, Atomic Age Monster reflects, to some extent, the atomic anxiety that really flowered in the United States in the 1950s. And so, yes, that's a pretty broad definition. I thought that's what I would say. A monster who's both derived from nuclear elements, like I said, either test or experimental, whatever, that also reflects the atomic anxiety of that decade.
One thing that you pointed out in Apocalypse then is that there definitely seems to be a difference between the American approach to atomic monsters and the Japanese approach to atomic monsters. The Japan has more of a downbeat kind of ending to a lot of these things, whereas the America, we're always triumphing. Do you think that really just comes down to how World War II played out between the two countries?
I do think so. Both countries are on polar opposite sides. The United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan was the recipient of that, and so far the only recipients of nuclear weapons. Hopefully nuclear weapons will never be used. But yeah, because Japan, it happened to them. You read accounts of, especially like right after Hiroshima, for my book, Apocalypse Then, went back and read accounts. There were 3 standing hospitals, and it's just horrible what happened. And then the aftermath, cancer and all those sorts of things. So they experienced that. We, meaning the United States, on the other hand, we bombed them. They did surrender. So the United States at the time, I believe it was 80% of Americans were totally for bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we didn't feel it. And so I think to Japan, they had a greater appreciation of just how serious nuclear weapons are and what they could do on a massive scale. Were the superpowers at the time to have gotten into a conflict. America, on the other hand, we were the dominant world power and much more optimistic. American know-how can solve everything. And especially the authorities in the 50s, the authorities were still pretty revered, meaning government. And this is not to put down when I say military. I'm all for the troops, always, of course. But
sure.
But just as a minor digression, in the 1950s, General Curtis LeMay was the commander of SAC, Strategic Air Command, and there is good evidence that he wanted to actually goad the Soviet Union into having a nuclear war because he thought we would win. It's that kind of attitude that existed in the U.S. that you wouldn't have never find that in Japan at the time. Just did not exist. In fact, 2/3 of the Japanese population around the mid-50s signed petitions to end nuclear war testing. And fortunately, in 1961, above-ground testing there was a treaty, so it was made illegal internationally. If, for example, Godzilla, I think that's a perfect example of the first Godzilla movie. You look at Godzilla, you look at the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Godzilla is very nightmarish, and it doesn't have an upbeat ending, especially in the Japanese version, where Toxic Kimura actually says there could be more Godzillas. Whereas in Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, it's dead at the end. We fired a radioactive isotope into his throat wound. It's gone. And I think that's another key difference in Japanese American. Japanese implied it's not over. It's ongoing. A lot of American films with atomic monsters, it's over at the end of the film. One major exception would be Them. Them ends with a question mark in terms of they're not really sure how things are going to go. In fact, I love the last line of the film, Them. And in case listeners aren't familiar, the film concerns giant ants created by nuclear test in white sands in 1945, maybe it's 1954. But after the ants have been killed in the LA storm drains and the heroes are watching them roast, the main scientist in the movie, Edmund Glenn, says that, I love this line, he says, when man entered the atomic age, he opened a door into a new world. What we eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict. And that's close to the Japanese spirit. In other words, it's not over. We're not really sure what's going to happen. But that makes it different than most American films. Majority of American films, like I said, in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, it's gone. Other big bug films in the United States, Tarantula, for example, which I think is a wonderful film, it's dead. It's gone at the end. And again, American know-how, specifically the American military, has finished it off. So, yeah, I definitely see differences in the Japanese viewpoint and the American viewpoints.
I think it's pretty obvious, too, if you start watching something like Godzilla, especially the Japanese cut. King of the Monsters, not as much. I mean, it's still there, but with the Japanese cut, the original Gojira, it is a terrifying film. And I know as the Godzilla films progressed, they kind of lightened up a little bit. You know, he becomes the protector of the world. Not as much as, say, like Gamera did, but, you know, they do lighten up a little bit. But the original Godzilla, it's a flat-out horror movie on top of everything else. It's horrific. You know, right down to the bit with the woman telling her child, we're going to be with your father soon, you know, and knowing that the father is gone. It's just heartbreakingly tragic, some of the things that happen in that film.
Yeah, I agree.
Whereas in Tarantula, we just drop napalm on it and call it good.
Yes.
So, you know, which I love too. I mean, I love them both, so don't get me wrong. And we'll talk about the movies that we love. But before we get too much further into this, Mike, there is something that we do here on Monster Kid Radio. Anytime somebody comes on, we have a game that we play. It's called the Classic Five. Now, what the Classic Five is I've got a deck of cards here. Each one of these has a this or that, which movie do you prefer style question. They all have to do with classic monster movies or genre cinema. There are no wrong answers. It's just kind of a way to start a conversation. Not that we have trouble starting a conversation here, obviously, but it's an icebreaker. You ready to play the Classic Five, Mike?
Oh, absolutely.
Here we go. So 5 cards, 5 questions. Card number 1. Mike, what was the most recent monster movie that you watched?
Excellent question. I'm going to have to think a minute. Last monster movie that I watched. It was probably... I watched Monster Z, or Invasion of Astro Monster, not too long ago. Probably the last one.
Now, giant entertainment, giant terror. Monster Zero.
Do you see anything?
From a planet 50 million miles beyond the stars came a strange message. Lend us your Rodan and Godzilla to fight our Monster Zero. Earth answers, and the most dreaded creatures ever to walk our planet are lifted into outer space. The stage is set for the mightiest battle ever seen by the universe in Monster Zero.
Right on. That's a good one. That's a good one. All right, card number 2. Who's your favorite mad scientist?
Probably Lionel Atwill, although I thought Charles Lawton in Island of Lost Souls was great. I mean, I know he didn't go on to do other mad scientists, but I thought he was terrific. So I'd probably choose him, even though it was just one film. I just thought he did it so well.
There are no wrong answers, man. And that one, he's good. He's terrifying, and he's good.
Yeah.
I wish he had done more.
Yeah, me too.
But more mad scientist roles, anyway. He's a phenomenal actor, but as a mad scientist, man, he brought so much to the table.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Card number 3. Ooh, who never appeared in a kaiju film, but you wish they had?
John Wayne. That was just kind of off the cuff. You gotta admit, that would have been different. Yeah. Just the juxtaposition of imagining him in a Godzilla film, that would be so different. Maybe being a little more serious, Peter Cushing. An excellent actor and versatile. And I could easily see him, having played an American scientist in a Japanese film. And as you know, Nick Adams in Frankenstein Conquers the World played an American scientist. And Russ Tamblyn did so in War of the Gargantuans. I could easily see Peter Cushing maybe playing a radiological expert, who's brought in and collaborates with one of the Japanese scientists on defeating whatever the current menace is. But I still think John Wayne would be fun to have seen in a kaiju film.
It's been amazing. See, this is how I know you and I are going to get along, because Peter Cushing is right up there, favorite actor.
Yeah.
For my money, he can do no wrong, and I would love to. Oh man, it would have been great to see him in a kaiju film of some sort.
And I know we're in agreement here. He was an incredible actor. I think by the mainstream, and I know this is often common, but I think among the mainstream, maybe not as appreciated as he could have been. On the other hand, Leonard Maltin always gave him good reviews in his film, but I just thought he was amazing. I mean, to me, he was Van Helsing, and I'm a little biased when I've seen movies since Horror Dracula and Brides of Dracula, because as good as some of the Van Helsings have been, to me, Peter Cushing just represented Van Helsing.
Oh yeah, he's the man of action. He's the man of knowledge. He's the man.
Mm-hmm.
He's the man.
Yeah.
And you start talking about him being like a scientist that comes in to help. I'm getting like shades of Island of Terror, that kind of role that he played there, where he comes in and knows. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. Some fan fiction writer needs to write this for us.
Well, that would
this
be
sounds
pretty
great.
cool. Yeah, that would be cool.
Or John Wayne. I'll take that too. That sounds good too. Right. Card number 4. What's your favorite classic 3D movie?
Probably It Came from Outer Space.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Richard Carlson. I'm sure you'd all like to know something about the new entertainment miracle, Third Dimension. What it is, what it does. Well, the best way I can describe it to you is to tell you that it makes the screen absolutely real and alive. People, objects, landscapes take on a depth and a dimension such as they have in real life. And it has an added quality. Objects actually seem to come out of the screen. So real they almost touch you, creating the most dramatic impact that the screen has ever known. Coming to an incredible climax when a molten meteoric spaceship from another planet rushes out of the heavens right at you. Of course, these illustrations are only a pale suggestion of the real thing. It can't be described, it's got to be seen and experienced. And I must add that even without 3D, It Came from Outer Space is a picture that you'll long remember for its blending of science and fiction, for its eerie terror, and for its story of an invasion from another planet that's almost beyond imagining. I can tell you from its size and its appearance, this thing came from outer space. I even have reason to believe that there's some form of life in it. What do you want? What are you doing? Let me see you as you really are.
I've never actually had the chance to see. In fact, I've never had the chance to see a 3D film, but It Came from Outer Space. I think it's a very good science fiction film. Now, speaking of that, and I'm sure you'd read that Them was originally going to be filmed in 3D.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but the idea was scuttled. It's always made me wonder, well, what would it have looked like? I guess not that different on, maybe a TV screen, but I've always wondered what it would have been like. And in fact, I read one reason they have the mock-ups of ants in them. They had 2 full-bodied ones and then some front and head mock-ups. Is because they were thinking about, this could be I remember they had the idea of the antennas going out over the audience, stuff like that, but didn't happen. But It Came from Outer Space. It's a first-rate film. Second choice probably Revenge of the Creature. I think that would. The sequels go. I liked it quite a bit.
Really, over the first Creature film?
No.
Oh,
I
okay,
can't say that, but I and this is just idiosyncratic. I like it as much. And I know it puts me in the minority, and that's fine. But there's just something about it. It's just, to me, is quintessential 1950s American monster movie. And I know objectively, no, it's not as good as Creature from the Black Lagoon on a number of levels. But I still, I wouldn't exactly call it guilty pleasure, but just as a purely subjective, it's actually one of my favorite 50s monster films.
I don't know if you've listened to a lot of episodes of Monster Kid Radio before, but you are checking all the boxes for me. I love Creature from the Black Lagoon. That one is my favorite film, and Revenge of the Creature is right up there because it's got John Agar. So, there we go. All right, final card number 5. If you could swap places with any character from a classic monster movie, who would it be?
It would probably be, in This Island Earth, the American scientist. Rex Reason that with him because he gets to go on an incredible adventure. He goes to outer space, he goes to this other planet, where all this exciting stuff is happening. That I think would be really fun.
So switching places with Rex Reason, you get to hang out with Faith. Yeah.
Well, there's that too. There's that too. Yeah, a little romantic interest. So, but yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, that was the classic 5. How do you feel, Mike?
Well, I feel very good.
Awesome. I think you passed. I think you win.
We're good. Okay. Good. Glad to hear it.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about these big bug monster movies, because there's just something primally cool about seeing a monster movie with giant bugs. We already talked a little bit about them, and and Tarantula came up, and there's a handful of others. It's a subgenre in the monster movie field that you've written about in your books and over the years you've brought up in Atomic Drive-In. It comes up quite a bit, and I mean, John Agar fought one, so of course, I'm going to love those movies too. These are just fantastic movies, and I thought it would be great to have you on the show because you love them as much as I do, if not more, and talk about some of our favorites, kind of do a top 3 list.
Okay.
And I've prepared a list of my top 3 favorite giant big bug monster movies. You did as well. I'm sure there's going to be some overlap here, and we might even have some honorable mentions, but I thought I'd kick it off with my number 3 pick. Sure. I'm going to go to Japan, and I'm going to bring up Rodan because it's got those mega nulons in there, and those are giant bugs.
They are. They are.
And it's hard to not look at especially 50s kaiju films and say, hey, there's an atomic influence in there too. So I love Rodan. It's probably my favorite non-Godzilla Toho kaiju.
Monster of is a skyscraper. When he moves, the whole earth quivers and quakes, and an abyss of horror opens up. See these prehistoric beasts emerge from the bowels of the earth after 200 million years to devastate mankind. Supersonic jets cannot catch him. Nothing can stop him. Nothing escapes this monstrous beast of evil.
I love the film. I love the character, and I'm really looking forward to what they do in the new Godzilla with the Rodan character. I feel like there's not enough Rodan out there for me, and the film overall is also scary. I mean, before it starts getting all kid-friendly. A little Lovecraftian in bits as well, which really speaks well to me, too. So my number 3 pick would be Rodan.
Okay.
What would your number 3 be, Mike?
My number 3 would be the monster that challenged the world.
An upheaval of nature tears loose a creature out of the nightmare of time. Spawned by an earthquake on the bed of the ocean, a reptilian, earth-shaking beast of the sea. The monster that challenged the world.
My tank.
What's wrong?
Blake's tank is caught in the undergrowth.
God! What happened?
Oh my God, his body. He died right in front of me. I couldn't help him. I better go back.
Talk sense. What's down there?
I don't know. I never saw anything like it before.
It's the size of a dinosaur, and 10 times more terrifying, hurling the horrors of the unknown at every living thing.
I first saw it in the mid-1960s when I was a wee lad, as they say, and it was terrific. The monster in it was wonderful. At that time, state-of-the-art. And I was not disappointed. When I was a kid, I would rate a monster film by how cool is the monster, and occasionally I'd be disappointed. That I was not disappointed a bit. But when I saw it later as a teenager, I appreciated it. It's got a good script. It's very competently made, very low-key, good acting, and Hans Conried is in it as Dr. Rogers, one of my favorite character actors. And also as an adult, one thing I like, Tim Holt is the hero. At the end of the film, where he's pulled the steam tunnel away and he's firing it at the creature, the monster, he actually looks terrified. And I don't know if that was in the script or that was just him adding it, but I thought, well, that's cool because almost anyone would be terrified. But like I said, love the monsters in it. It's actually, I've read they only had one actual thing. There's one part where Hans Conried tells us that one of these monsters could lay thousands of eggs and therefore, attack the world. Now, that title, in a way, may be a little too much, monster that challenged the world. It's not really the world, but in that sense it is. In fact, Hans Conried says, can you imagine an army of these things descending on one of our cities? And, of course, any monster kid could imagine that. But, but that would be mine. That would be my third.
So with Rodan, they're kind of like giant dragonfly larvae. What would you call the big bug in the Monster that Challenged the World? It's kind of like a snail, mollusk kind of thing.
Yeah, mollusk. The one thing I thought was odd when I first saw the film in the mid-'60s is when they show the film and you see snails. Because I remember even saying out loud, my brother and I always watch these things together. And I said, that doesn't look like a snail. But yeah, I would call it a mollusk. I think that's a good designation.
Yeah, it's a good film too. It's got a great score too. I love the music in all of these films, but the music in The Monster That Challenged the World, I mean, it's just good. I don't know what else to say there. It's good. And I do like Conrad, what's his name? Dr. Rogers, is that the character's name in the film?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another excellent scientist type hero in these films.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So for my second pick, if I'm counting down for number 2, and I've been really struggling here with what my number 1 and number 2 are going to be. And I think today, and this may change tomorrow, but I think today I'm going to put Tarantula in there. No, it's not quite atomic. It's from that era, but it's not like nuclear energy made the bug, made the thing. I love John Agar. I am a huge fan of what he does, and for me, put John Agar in a movie, you're halfway there already.
Even science was stunned. The new atomic miracle should have been mankind's greatest boon. Instead, when such power to cause phenomenal growth proved dangerously unstable, man was confronted with his most shocking blunder.
The isotope triggered our nutrients into a nightmare.
A blunder that transformed a tiny insect into the 100-foot spider that was now ravaging the panic-stricken countryside.
Tarantula is one of these quintessential Universal giant monster movies from the 50s. It's got great music, a lot of callbacks to Creature from the Black Lagoon, so, I'm there. Mira Corday is phenomenal. She's one of my favorite actresses from this era. So I'm probably going to go with Tarantula here. And it's an early role for Clint Eastwood at the very end. He's the one that drops the napalm.
I believe he's not Bilbo, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because when you hear his voice, you know who that is, once he became a star. And I hope I'm not rushing, but what's interesting is Tarantula is also my number 2.
Oh, really?
So yeah, we kind of coincide there for all the reasons you've said. I also think the pacing is really good. It doesn't lag. I think the last 20 minutes are especially tight. And also, I like John Agar. And also, it's hard to kill the giant spider. Dynamite doesn't do anything. It's crawling towards the city. The missiles don't seem to do much, but then the napalm fries it. But I like one scene where Tarantula crawls over a hill. It's at night after John Agar has rescued Mira Corday. The police captain tells 2 of his men, "You boys slow it down," while they go to town. I'm thinking, yeah, right, dude. They're supposed to, these 2 guys, they spray it with machine gun fire, but they wind up as Tarantula Chow. But yes, Tarantula's very good. So we're definitely in sync there. I also thought the effects were good.
Oh yeah,
especially for the time. And I like little details, like you can see the shadow beneath the giant spider as it crawls along. Just really good effects for the time. But I'm with you there. Tarantula's my number 2 as well.
Yeah, the visual effects, the optical effects they did with the spider, and then even the makeup effects they did with the acromegaly at the very beginning of the film, when we're seeing the results of that there as well. It's a nice blend of the classic monster makeup that you expect from Universal, but then you've got the optical effects to make the giant monsters, the giant bugs. I really like the performances here, and you mentioned the pacing, and I'm surprised we haven't mentioned his name yet. Jack Arnold was the director of this, and he directed, It Came From Outer Space, which you mentioned earlier. I mean, he was such a phenomenal science fiction director for Universal, and even some non-Universal stuff like the Space Children. Just, there's something about the way he was able to make the science fiction elements just kind of jump along without really getting too bogged down with the science. I mean, we have a little mini science lesson in a lot of these movies, but it doesn't bog the movie down.
I think Arnold's films are great as well. My favorite of his, and I hope I'm not digressing too much.
No, it's fine.
The Incredible Shrinking Man. I mean,
oh, yeah.
And to me, it works on so many levels. But just on a pure, again, when I saw it, I think I was in second grade, the spider scene, of course, that was very arresting. Just pure monster stuff. It's one of the scariest things, I think. Well, excellent script. And a mature kind of film, not afraid of its subject matter, doesn't talk down to it. But what, actually shows us what happens to this guy is his familiar world literally is leaving him, and the more he shrinks, it changes his viewpoint. And the viewpoint, for example, is cat Butch, which tries to eat him for lunch. Yeah. But as a kid, it was that spider scene. I won't give it away for anybody that hasn't seen it. I love the final couple of minutes of Incredible Shrinking Man. Now, I know that some fans don't like that ending. In fact, I taught a class, or actually was asked to guest teach a class on atomic grade B monster movies, believe it or not. And I brought this up, and they had watched it. The teacher had them watch Incredible Shrinking Man. And I asked, okay, show of hands, how many of you like the ending? And there may have been just 2 or 3. How many of you did not like the ending? Because everybody else.
Oh, wow.
The teacher also said she didn't like the ending. She said, no, it's just too downbeat. I don't actually take it as downbeat. But anyway, like I said, I don't want to give it away for anyone who hasn't seen it. But excellent film. And like I said, Jack Arnold, terrific script by Richard Matheson.
Yeah, if you didn't mention him, I was going to. Richard Matheson, a phenomenal horror and science fiction author and screenwriter. Listeners, if you're not familiar with Richard Matheson, if you don't think you're familiar with Richard Matheson, you're wrong, because he did so much for the movies that we as monster kids love. And I'm going to side with you regarding the ending of The Incredible Shrinking Man. I think it's a little downbeat, sure, but I do like that it still has an element of, all is not lost. I'm still going to, we're dancing around the ending, and I think most people have probably seen it, but I think you and I are on the same page here regarding that. I love the performance by Grant Williams in this. I think it's his strongest genre work.
Oh, yeah.
And, we're on this journey with him, and it's great.
Yeah, it's too bad he didn't get a lot of successfully good roles, because I thought he and Randy Stewart are really good.
Oh, yeah.
As the two leads. I mean, it even subtly explores the sexual tension between them as he shrinks.
Yeah.
And that could have been mishandled. It could have just been ludicrous, or I like the way that is treated. Go back to the ending, just what you were saying, I absolutely agree with. I think it does have a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
That to me is one of the best things in science fiction or fantasy. Not always easy to achieve, I don't think, but when it is, and I think it happens to be in Incredible Shrinking Man.
Again, we're going to get along just fine, Mike. Especially since our number 2s match up. Now, before I tell you my number 1, and
that's pretty cool.
Before I tell you my number 1, and I assume it's probably right there with you. I'm just going to guess. I'm going to give you an honorable mention. One of my honorable mentions here, if it was like a top 4 list, I'd probably mention The Black Scorpion, which I really enjoy as well, partly because Mira Corday is fantastic in it. But I'm also a big fan of Richard Denning because of the creature connection, and he was also in Creature with the Atomic Brain, or the Atom Brain. A big fan of what he brings to the table, and really enjoyed his performance in that. Plus, it's another giant spider thing, and I kind of like the giant spider-ish, giant arachnid monster element. So The Black Scorpion is right up there with me. And there's a great Blu-ray that came out of that a couple years back that I highly recommend, just because it's The Black Scorpion. Did you have any others that you couldn't make fit into a top 3 list?
I know, it's kind of like an amazing coincidence, as they say, The Black Scorpion.
Really?
And actually, I wrestled with it in The Monster That Challenged the World as number 3. Now, I can say as an 8-year-old, I happened to see several monster movies on TV when I was 8. The Black Scorpion was one of my very favorites. The scorpions, the cavern sequence.
Oh, man.
You said where the trapdoor spider chases little boy, and scorpion attacking the worm, and especially when they derailed the train. Just incredible. As a kid, it was like, this is so fulfilled my expectations and actually exceeded them. Just wonderful effects. Of course, Willis O'Brien and Pete Peterson. I have read at that point Willis O'Brien wasn't doing as much of the work, but just great stop motion stuff.
Oh, it's one of the last things that he worked on, isn't it?
Yeah. There was the giant behemoth, and again, I want to really digress, but then there was his idea for King Kong versus Frankenstein. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and then how that became, in a roundabout way, King Kong versus Godzilla.
His work on the Black Scorpion, I mean, there's a reason why we talk about Willis O'Brien today. I think Harryhausen probably gets more attention, and rightfully so. He kind of built on what O'Brien started, but O'Brien was a pioneer. I'm glad the Black Scorpion happened. I would have liked to have seen O'Brien get a little bit more prestige work towards the end of his career. But, it's kind of how Hollywood worked at the time. But yeah, the Black Scorpion is just solid. It's not directed by Arnold, though, but it does have good pacing.
No.
I think Edward Ludwig, is that the director's name?
Yes. And occasionally, used to when I look in movie books, not genre movie books, just mainstream movie books, they give it a bad... I remember one of them said lowercase thriller. Of course, I've always liked the film. I've never thought it was bad, so I'm always a little puzzled when somebody says, "Oh, acting and everything's not that good." I totally disagree. And Richard Denning, it's interesting you mentioned him. I liked him as well. I know Bill Warren in Keep Watching the Skies says to him, Richard Denning doesn't look like he could be a hero, but I don't agree. I think he, like you're saying, in Black Scorpion, handles that role very well. Also, Creature Without a Brain. And he is a villain, of course, in a Creature from the Black Lagoon, but I think one of the underrated monster movie actors.
I think that's why I like him so much, is that he plays the villain in Creature from the Black Lagoon, but he's one of the lead heroes in things like Day the World Ended or Black Scorpion. He had the range and could do both believably. You could really despise him and kind of cheer when the creature takes him out in Black Lagoon, but you're wanting him to survive the day the world ended because he's such a good guy. Plus, he was married to Evelyn Akers, so he's got a connection to classic Universal,
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on Danny.
One of the other things that I love about, we'll get to our number ones, which I think is probably the same, but one of the other things that I love about Black Scorpion, and this is one of the things that I love about watching classic genre cinema, or just classic film in general, is that not only does it have the great monster threat and some really scary sequences, you mentioned the cavern scene in Black Scorpion, but you also get a little bit of a cultural look at what things were like in the 50s for Americans working and living in Mexico, and the combination of those cultures coming together. And I've said this before on the show repeatedly. One of the things I love about these films is that it's kind of like a time capsule. It's a look at what society was like during a particular time. In the background, these movies are documentaries of what things were like society-wise, what the mores were, what the traditions were, how these people lived. Yeah, there's a giant monster running around, but if you really look at it, how does Richard Denning interact with the locals and in the relationship he has with the Mexicans while he's down there? And it's just really fascinating to me to see a film like this still stay true, I assume, to what those relationships might be like.
I think that's an excellent point, that a lot of these films, and especially there, because as you said, that's Americans interacting with a different culture, can say a lot about Americans at the time. And I agree that the films in general can say, for example, in Tarantula, and I've got this in my book, but it's a pretty high optimistic viewpoint. There was what could even be considered naive viewpoint, maybe, that very trusting. For example, in the film, when John Agar, I believe, says you need to get hold of the Air Force, and they do, and the Air Force doesn't say, yeah, right, giant spider. No, they send the jets. I think you can see that in a lot of American, especially Italian monster films in the 50s, that basically the authorities were trusted. I mean, it was pre-Vietnam, pre all the things that happened in the 60s, and then Watergate in the 70s. So I think they show a kind of trust Americans had in its institutions, which wasn't intentional, like you said. It's there because that, I think, was one of the dominant attitudes at the time.
That's interesting, too, because, once things kind of get to the Vietnam era, we do start seeing the authorities, the police, don't believe the kids who thought they saw a monster somewhere. You do see that creep up in some 50s movies like The Blob. The police don't believe the world's oldest teenager, Steve McQueen, saying that he saw something. But, you do see that for the most part, that the authorities are to be trusted and will actually help. Whereas you get later on, we don't trust them nearly as much. So yeah, one of the things that we keep going back to the previous movies we just talked about, Tarantula.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Mara Corday. I mean, I've made that clear in previous episodes of the show and online. I really like her, and not just because she's attractive, but I felt like she was a very strong actress as well. Mm-hmm. And while she does have some, I don't know, maybe sexist traits, well, maybe not sexist, maybe the filmmakers were a little bit more sexist in regards to her portrayal. Like, there's one bit where she's like, I'm a scientist, but hey, a girl's got to get her hair done. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, let's give her more agency than that. But overall, I feel like she's still a strong character in the film, and another reason why I respond to it so well.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the way scripts were written, women sometimes didn't have a lot to do.
Right.
And not just in American monster movies, I think in movies in general, or American movies in general anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But that was kind of common.
Yeah. Mm. Did you have any other honorable mentions before we talk about our number one pick?
I did, actually.
Okay.
It's Mothra, but the reason I ultimately decided I'm not going to count it as an atomic monster film, to me, it's more like a live-action fairy tale.
Oh, okay.
The film, I don't think of it as science fiction even. I think of it as fantasy. You have this country, Rolisica. There is no real Rolisica, in actuality. Many have said it's supposed to be a combination of America and Russia. The way the film is done, wonderful color. But to me, it's like a fantasy. And so I don't think of it as a big Bogue film per se. I think it was trying to do different things. And of course, its monster has a motive. And it's not, to eat as many people as it can. It wants to rescue the two infant island fairies who've been kidnapped and are now being exploited by the villain Jerry Ito. I would still consider it a runner-up. I think of it more as a, like I said, fairy tale, daikaiju type thing, rather than a traditional big Bogue film.
I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to even how the movie was promoted. I mean, some of the taglines, ravishing a universe for love, that's not something Godzilla did,
Exactly. Yeah.
I can see that. I think Mothra is also pretty important in the whole kaiju thing because so many of these monsters are so lizard or reptilian-like. Godzilla, Rodan,
right.
Varan, they all look like giant lizards or dinosaurs or whatever. Mothra's a giant moth. But
yes,
Mothra still gets to hang out with these guys, and that says something. I think that a giant moth is held in the same regard as things like Godzilla, these things that are obviously reptilian and potentially aggressive. I like that a lot about Mothra, and I love the relationship between Mothra and the two the Peanuts. Two girls. I love that.
Yeah, me too. And you hit upon the other thing. I mean, what's different is there are those two fairies, and it is going to rescue them. And to me, that's another fantasy element that you simply wouldn't have found in an American monster film at that time.
Maybe twist it just a little bit, and Mothra becomes the hero in the film, just a little bit.
In a sense, yeah.
Whereas I don't think you could do that with the original Gojira.
No, you'd have to twist really hard.
Yeah. Well, I only had the one honorable mention. I only had Black Scorpion because I didn't even think about Mothra in this context. So, and what you brought up is probably why. But my number one pick, you could probably guess what it is. Listeners can probably guess what it is. I'm going with Them. I have to go with Them. It's the one giant big bug monster movie from this era that a lot of people will say it feels like a Universal monster movie, but it's got so much more going for it because of the ending, like you said. The effects are phenomenal. The sound. The sound the ants make. I'm an audio guy. I do sound effects for film. I do podcasting. I love sound being used as a way to convey emotion and story. And Them gives me chills when you hear that sound. I want that sound on my phone just so I can use it as a ringtone. I think that'd be fun, but kind of terrifying at the same time. What's your number one?
Them.
Okay, yeah.
You're right. I mean, we're in sync.
Watch out for them! A menace never known to man or beast before. An endless horde of crawling, crushing, gigantic creatures. So horrifying there was no word to describe them.
Watch out for Them! Watch out for Warner Brothers' screaming new shock sensation, Them!
Yes, I saw them. They were huge and scaly, and they had gigantic jaws, and then one came at me.
Kill one and two take its place. This is the endless onslaught of them, clawing up out of the earth from mile-deep catacombs.
See them, the most astounding journey into terror ever taken, starring James Whitmore, Edmund Gwenn, Joan Weldon, and James Arness. Them!
It's the grandfather of big buck films. That sound effect, I agree, was wonderful when I first saw the film, and that was when I was in second grade. Like I said, I got to see a lot of films during that year on TV. The sound when it happens, and you have the two characters, James Whitmore and the other guy, pass it off, William Shallard, pass it off as though it's the wind. And as a kid, I'm thinking that the wind. I happen to live in West Texas at the time, and we had a lot of wind. I thought that's not how the wind sounds. I mean, as the audience, it's something scary. But you hadn't seen, and I guess I got to see in optimal conditions because I didn't know what we were going to see. So that just seemed very eerie. I agree that sound very effective
and terrifying with the little girl.
Yes.
Yes. Wow, her performance and the catatonic state they find her in, and I don't think you really saw a lot of children in danger or having been affected that much in this era, and it's just heartbreaking and.
Yeah, because you think about, like, when I saw it as an adult, and of course as an adult, I saw things I didn't see as a kid. Like I said, it's very sad. I mean, her parents are dead, which is awful, and, she has witnessed this. And you're right, most films I don't know if I could say all, most films did not put kids in jeopardy. We mentioned a minute ago Black Scorpion. Of course, there is a little boy, but you don't really think the spider's going to get him, and it doesn't. Them is actually, in some ways, kind of grim. Like you said, the little girl and her fate. And I love as an adult, again, I got this apocalyptic sense. For example, when Edmund Gwenn says in the movie that, I can't remember the exact line, but within a year, if we don't, find the queen ants that flew off to make other nests, man as the dominant species could be extinct. Very apocalyptic. And I like the way, again, as an adult, that it mirrors what was happening in the atomic age at the time. The ants multiply rapidly. Of course, there's nuclear proliferation. And I just mentioned the ants can exterminate us in a year, according to Dr. Medford. We knew that nuclear weapons could do so in a short time as well. I like the script. I think it's better than, not that I'm putting down other big bug scripts, but I think it's a little better. It does some things I really like. You mentioned Mara Corday a few minutes ago, and how she was given the more, and most actresses were given very traditional roles for that time. Joan Weldon, though, when James Whitmore and James Arness go down in the ant's nest after they poison it with cyanide, she gets to go with them. She acts just as professional as they are. She doesn't scream. And then at the end, when they're going through the storm drains in Los Angeles to find out where the ants are, she's shotgunning one of the Jeeps.
Yeah.
and that actually, now I know she does scream when the ant appears the first time you see one of them. But on the other hand, actually, James Arness himself screams later in the film.
True.
he actually does. And, as an adult, I realized, wow, that's unusual. There probably is, but I can't offhand think of another 50s monster movie where it's the hero. Now, there may be other male characters who might scream, but the hero actually screams. And I thought those were really nice touches.
I'm trying to think of any, and the only other time I can think of a male character screaming, I can't think of anything from the 50s. The only thing that's coming to mind is like in The Mummy, at the beginning of The Mummy, when the guy sees Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
But that's in the 30s, and it's not quite the same, and he's not as prominent a character in the film. Listeners, if there's any others that you can think of, I'd love to hear about it, because it is kind of fascinating to think about that they did have the guy do it too.
Yeah.
But it is a strong screenplay, so, I mean, and it makes both characters feel more human and more full.
I think so. And, like I said, I got it as an adult. As a kid, again, it was just giant ants. This is really cool. And the various set pieces. I remember my brother and I especially liked when they were on the ship. And actually, you don't see a whole lot there, but I felt like we were, as a kid, I was seeing a whole. And of course, brother and I loved the storm drain sequence where the army's fighting the ants. I thought that was first grade.
I mean, it's just overall a solid film. I don't know what else more I can say here that Mike and I haven't already talked about. I'm sure most listeners have seen the film. If you haven't, if you've been avoiding it or you just haven't gotten around to it, listeners, you got to put it at the top of the list to watch, because it is solid. It is affecting. It's effective. The script is great. The direction is brisk, and the characterizations are full. I mean, these are real characters dealing with giant ants, which I think kind of grounds the film too, makes it feel a little bit more realistic than say. Right. I mean, I like Tarantula. A lot, sure. But I feel like on the realism scale, them seems to be more how we would really deal with it.
I read somewhere that and then Gordon Douglas, the director, of course, done mainstream films. At first, they thought the concept was humorous. Not intentionally, they just thought, well, that's just so over the top. But as they started making the film, the director got a lot more serious about it, and I understand so did the actors working on it. We're just used to monster movies in the sense of giant monsters, as opposed to the sense of, the classic horror 30s and 40s. We're used to them all over the place. Well, as you know, at that point, they were still fairly rare. For example, I don't think actors now in monster films at all think, oh, this is silly. No, it's an accepted genre. But yeah, I did read at the time initially, the filmmakers were like, well, that's kind of silly. But as they did it, they understood the gravity of it, especially the nods to what was going on in terms of nuclear proliferation in the real world. Yeah.
And there are so many giant bug monster movies out there that we've just kind of really scratched the surface. Yeah. I mean, you can even pull on something like, say, Killers from Space, where you've got the giant bugs underground that Peter Graves runs by over and over and over again.
Sure.
Yeah, I know. There's so many out there.
Yeah.
It's a fun subgenre to look at, and when you start to consider where they came from, the atomic background with the Cold War not having started yet, we're still dealing with the fallout of World War II and what could happen if somebody dropped a bomb on us, and what happened when we did drop a bomb in Japan. It's just kind of interesting to see where these things came from and kind of place that in context with what was happening historically across the world. I love these films, and even a modern day big bug movie is going to get my attention, at least to give it a shot. Might not love it as much as, say, like the Black Scorpion or Tarantula or them, but I'll still give it a shot. I've had a blast chatting with you, Mike. This has been so much fun, and I'm so glad that we got you on the show. I'd love to have you back on down the line to talk about maybe another movie or another topic, or maybe even your new novel that's coming up. Are you working on that now?
Yes, I am working on a novel now. I actually have it finished. I'm in the revising stages. It's a departure from most stuff I've written. It's more science fiction. Yeah, it's so completely not like what I do have some ideas for other kaiju or giant monster related stuff. I just haven't gotten to them. Yeah, like I said, yes, I know it's an extreme departure from what I've done.
Hey, a good story is a good story. So, I wish you the best of luck with it.
Well, thank you.
As well as everything else you've got coming up. You're still doing Kaiju Corner and Scary Monsters magazine. Are you still writing for GFan as well?
Yeah, not on an every issue basis, but yeah. One thing that the editor, J.D. Lees, and you said you're familiar with GFan, he often prints my letters. For example, I sent in a review of the last Godzilla anime film. I'd contacted JD about it and asked him if I was doing a review, and he said, sure. And otherwise, like I alluded to earlier, of course, I'm really looking forward to Godzilla King of the Monsters.
I think a lot of us are.
Oh, yeah. I can hardly wait. Derek, I really appreciate you that you had me on. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, this has been a real treat for me, and I think for the listeners. I'll make sure there are links in the show notes for this episode for people to pick up the 2 books that you've got out right now. You can get them through Amazon. And like I said, Scary Monsters, GFan, you need to read Mike's work. It's good stuff. He's one of us.
Well, thank you.
Mike has contributed to books like Terror of the Lost Tokusatsu Films from the Files of the Big Book of Japanese Giant Monster Movies, or Dinosaur Memories 2, Pop Cultural Reflections on Dino, Daikaiju, and Paleo Imagery. He's also the author behind the fiction collection Atomic Drive-In, which I highly recommend, and the book, which is a must-have for all monster kids, Apocalypse Then, American and Japanese Atomic Cinema. I'll make sure there's a link to Mike's Amazon page in the show notes of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. I had a blast chatting with Mike, and that's actually one of the cool things about Monster Kid Radio is that I've had an opportunity to speak with people that I respected, whose work I've enjoyed over the years when it comes to writing about these kinds of movies. I get to have them on the show, and eventually I end up calling them a friend. Mike is definitely a friend and a friend of the show, and we'll have him back on anytime. Thanks again, Mike.
gentlemen, we are witnessing a biological chain reaction. A geometrical progression of deadly menace.
It had started casually, insignificantly, as momentous events often do.
Look there. 2 points off the port bow.
The giant behemoth, the fire-spitting monster predicted in the Bible. Its core a mass of lethal radiation. Rising from the depths of time, its strength enormous. Its gargantuan ferocity a threat to London, to the world itself.
We must find a way of destroying this creature in one piece. Judging by the beast's size, I would say it was powerful enough to drive a battleship.
Of course, its tremendous electric charge is what projects the radiation. That's what makes the creature so deadly.
Well, have you any concrete suggestions? Yes. First, block off the Thames.
How often has this happened to you? You're on your way home after a long day when suddenly tragedy strikes.
No human mind could imagine the enormous destructive power of this maddened, killing thing.
Professor, there's a big lizard back there and he's heading this way. Now get aboard!
It's the kind of thing which can ruin your weekend. To prevent catastrophe, you need the Handbook for Surviving a Giant Monster Attack. This book features extensively researched methods to help you survive a giant monster event. You'll discover which vehicle you should use for making your escape, which method of counterattack is best for specific types of monsters.
Hydrogen weapons, capable of wiping cities, countries off the face of the earth, are completely ineffective against this creature from the skies.
And what common mistakes people make while fighting back. So pick up your copy of the Handbook for Surviving a Giant Monster Attack by Anthony Wendell today on Amazon. You can thank us by surviving.
Godzilla, king of the monsters, alive, surging up from the depths of the sea on a tidal wave of terror to wreak vengeance on mankind.
Godzilla, king of the monsters. It's alive.
A gigantic beast,
Stalking the earth, crushing all before it.
in a cyclonic cavalcade of electrifying horror.
Raging through the streets on a rampage of total destruction.
Godzilla, king of the monsters,
Incredible titan of terror.
wiping out a city of 6 million in a holocaust of flame.
Jet flames cannot destroy it.
Bombs cannot kill it.
All modern weapons fail.
Is this the end of our civilization?
Can the scientists of the world find a way to stop this creature?
For the answer, see Godzilla, king of the monsters.
You may wish to deny it, but your eyes tell you it's true.
A tale to stun the mind.
More fantastic than any ever written by Jules Verne.
More terrifying than any ever shown on the screen.
Awesome.
Incredible.
Unbelievable.
A story beyond your wildest dreams.
Dynamic violence.
Savage action.
Spectacular thrills.
Godzilla, king of the monsters.
Fantastic beyond comprehension.
Gripping beyond compare.
Astounding beyond belief.
The mightiest monster of them all.
See Godzilla, king of the monsters.
Hello, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. When I heard that Derek and his guest Mike Bogue were going to talk about their favorite giant bug movies, I remembered an article from one of my first FMs entitled Attack of the Giant Insects. It appeared in Famous Monsters 95 from January of 1973. It mentioned 46 different movies that featured giant insects of one kind or another, from classics like them to not so classics like Horror of Spider Island. The article was written by Thomas Rogers. Today I want to look at what was said about the films Derek and Mike talked about, starting with honorable mentions. Here is what was said about Black Scorpion. The Black Scorpion lived in a huge underground cavern, along with a great many other giant scorpions. There were also a number of enormous prehistoric earthworms residing in the cavern. The scorpions, of course, were carnivorous. Before the movie ended, the earthworms were eaten by the scorpions, and soon afterward, the largest scorpion killed off all the others. Alone, the armored super insect fought against Mexican troops, tanks, and helicopters. Only an electrified medical harpoon was able to put a stop to the monster's blood feast. Next up, we have Mothra. Mothra started out as an egg, progressed to a giant insect larva, and ended up as a huge moth after covering itself with a colossal cocoon. It attacked Japan when the two tiny females who were under its protection were kidnapped from their island home. Mothra, of course, was impervious to modern weapons. It wrecked a large part of Tokyo before rescuing the tiny twins and flying them back to their homeland. At number 3 for Mike, we have The Monster That Challenged the World. There was more than one monster that challenged the world. These giant underwater snails were left over from some prehistoric era. They were definitely anti-people, asphyxiating anyone who got within reach. The Navy used explosives to destroy all but one of the huge mollusks, and the sole survivor was later crushed to death in a canal lock. A single egg remained intact inside a Navy laboratory, and through an accident it hatched a full-grown creature right on the military base. Scalding hot water and machine gun bullets finished this one off, and the terrifying species was no more. For Derek's number 3 pick, we have Rodan. The first thing baby Rodan ate after hatching from his enormous egg were the prehistoric Megnurons, which were crawling around near him. These giant centipede-like flesh eaters had been terrorizing a mining town before Rodan made a meal of them, and the Japanese people were relieved when the multi-legged beast disappeared. Unfortunately, the oversized pterodactyl and his mate did far more damage than the insects would have. At number 2 for Mike and Derek, we have Tarantula. The voracious tarantula was enlarged within a desert laboratory, and it continued to grow after it accidentally escaped from there. For a while, it was content with eating cattle, but then it decided to add humans to its menu. Dynamite and bullets proved useless against the behemoth. It took napalm-carrying Air Force jets to put a stop to the gargantuan. And at number 1 for Mike and Derek, we have Them. Them, one of the top 25 sci-fi films of all time, was the first movie dealing solely with giant insects, enormous mutated ants. These were created by America's first atomic bomb test. They were spawned in a desert in New Mexico, and most of the original colony died there, killed by poisonous gas and fire. 2 queen ants and some winged males escaped, though, and they soon started their own colonies on a ship at sea and under the riverbed of Los Angeles. The ship was sunk by a naval battlecruiser, and the remaining colony was annihilated by a large detachment of soldiers armed with flamethrowers and other assorted weapons. I loved this article since I first saw it back in 1973, as it acted as a checklist of great movies to see over time. I've seen about 95% of them, so I have a couple to go. And if Derek talks about any other big bug movies, we know that FM probably had something to say about them.
Of Spider Island. 8 beautiful girls and 1 lone man struggling for survival, with death, sudden, violent, and horrible, lurking in the shadows. Horrors of Spider Island. Out of the night came a fate worse than death. A man's mind twisted, his brain poisoned, with an uncontrollable lust to kill. Horrors of Spider Island. A tale of terror that will leave you limp. So hideous and shocking, you won't believe your eyes. His hunger for victims was never satisfied. to be frightened out of your wits by the horrors of Spider Island.
Dr. Tongue's I Had That Shop, 7129 Northeast Fremont Street. Vintage goofiness from years gone by. Sci-fi and fantasy memorabilia. We specialize in things your mother threw away, and some she didn't. Dr. Tongue's Toys.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. I want to thank you guys and gals for listening in, for downloading the show, for retweeting tweets, for sharing the posts on Facebook, and just generally being a supporter of what we do here at Monster Kid Radio. If you are a user of iTunes, please consider hopping over to the Apple Podcast side of things and leaving us an honest review. It definitely helps us out and lets me know what I'm doing right and what I might be doing wrong. I always want to make the show better and better and better. Along those lines, if you have any feedback for the show, any comments about anything that we've talked about, anything that you've liked, anything that you disliked, any comments you want to throw out there, or do you have a favorite giant big bug monster movie that we didn't talk about, email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com or call and leave us a voicemail at 503-479-5657. That's 503-479-5MKR. Now, this contact information is available over at our website at monsterkidradio.net, where you're going to find links to everything that we've talked about here on the show. I've already mentioned that there will be a link to Mike Bogue's Amazon author page. I'll make sure there's a place for you to order copies of my book, Monster Hunter for Hire, as well as a handful of the movies that we've brought up during our conversation. If you follow the Amazon link from our website, we get a little bit of scratch back from that, kind of help support the show. Speaking of supporting the show, you can become a patron over at Patreon. Either follow the link on our website or just look up Monster Kid Radio at patreon.com, and you can learn how you can contribute to the show that way. And I know I'm a little behind on some of the rewards for higher level patrons. I apologize about that. I think I'm going to have to go in and revise them again to make them something that I can actually deliver and give you value for becoming a higher tier patron while still delivering the podcast at the level that, well, everybody has come to expect. So that'll be coming up. Stay tuned for that. I'll be revising that probably sometime next month, which is May, which means it's time to shift gears here at Monster Kid Radio. We're going to celebrate Lucha de Mayo. I did it again. Lucha de Mayo here on the show. Lucha de Mayo is when we look at luchador, monster, and genre films. I'm a big fan of these films. Santo, Blue Demon, Mil Máscaras, Tiana Blas, all of them. I love these movies quite a bit. And next month, we're going to start celebrating them again. We've got some of our old friends back. We've got Mark Peterson, Frank Schildener, and Kenny's going to be joining us as well. And a few other tricks up my sleeve when we dive into some of these luchador monster movies. Which one are we going to kick things off with? You're going to have to come back next week to find out, or just pay attention over at monsterkidradio.net. I'll also probably mention something on Twitter and Facebook. If you are a user of Facebook, please consider liking the page and joining the group, and, follow us on Twitter too. Oh, and while not all of it is monster related, I'll go ahead and let you guys and gals know there will also be a link in the show notes to my eBay page. I'm starting the Pay for Derek's Hotel Room at Monster Bash Fund over there, so I've been putting a lot of things up on eBay lately. So, maybe there's something over there that you'd like to get your hands on, and it would help me out. And, it's win-win, basically. Otherwise, I may just end up bringing an air mattress with me to the Monster Bash and setting it up underneath the Monster Kid radio table and just kind of hope that I don't get caught. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, big thanks to the band, The Spiritones. Please check them out at thespiritones.bandcamp.com or look them up on Facebook, where you can find a link to an upcoming show for them on May 18th. That's a Saturday at the King's Arms Hotel in Kirkby, Lonsdale, over there in the UK. They're going to be doing a show. Starts at 9 p.m. If you're in the area, drop by and let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Of course, that doesn't apply to Professor Frenzy's Bedtime Stories. That is copyright Professor Frenzy and Gerry Green. And, of course, the song that we're playing this week, Spirotonic. Again, that belongs to the Spiritones. It's off their album, Next Stop the Moon. Check it out. It's a 4-track album, and you can pick up a digital version of it for £3. That's less than £1 a song. How cool is that? My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week when I'm wearing my luchador mask. Ciao.